The snowstorm came in thick and fast, swallowing the two-lane road in a white blur. Officer Daniel Malar slowed his patrol cruiser, the headlights barely cutting through the flurry. It was supposed to be a quiet shift, just a late check on the back roads of Flathead County, Montana. But then he saw it, a dark shape on the shoulder, half buried in snow. He pulled over, heart tightening, instincts kicking in. As he stepped out, the cold slapped his face, and the wind howled through the pine trees like something alive. And there it was, a tiny German shepherd puppy, shivering violently, its eyes wide with fear. Behind it, nearly invisible against the trees, stood 3 wolves watching silently, their breath misting in the air. Daniel didn't hesitate. He knelt, scooped the pup into his arms, and backed slowly toward his cruiser. The wolves didn't move. They just stared, their gaze unreadable, more like they were surrendering the puppy than giving chase. It unsettled him deeply. The little one buried its nose into his jacket, letting out the faintest whimper. Daniel could feel its heartbeat, rapid, terrified, alive. As he drove back to town, hands tight on the wheel, he glanced at the mirror. The wolves were gone, but something told him this wasn't just a rescue. This was an exchange, and he had no idea what he had just accepted. At home, he wrapped the puppy in an old army blanket and set it by the fire. His house, once filled with his late wife Maggie's laughter, had been silent for 8 long years. But now there was breathing, life. He named her Sadie, not knowing why, only that the name felt right. She stared at him with wide, intelligent eyes, not like a typical pup. She didn't bark. She didn't whine. She watched. She listened. It was as if she had seen more than any creature her size should have. The local vet, Dr. Emily Carter, ran tests and gave Sadie a clean bill of health. But even she raised an eyebrow. "She's unusually alert," Emily said. "Hyper-aware even. Keep an eye on her development." Daniel nodded, but he already knew something about Sadie was different. She followed his every move, and sometimes at night, she sat by the window staring into the dark forest, as if waiting for something or someone. Daniel tried not to overthink it. Grief could play tricks on a man, and he knew loss well. But Sadie didn't feel like a pet. She felt like a presence, a mirror, a connection to something he hadn't touched in years, maybe ever. And the way the wolves had just let her go, it haunted him. Because deep down, Daniel knew. Sadie hadn't just survived the forest. She had come from it. 3 months had passed since the night Daniel found Sadie in the snow, and life had started to shift in subtle but undeniable ways. The old silence in his home was gone, replaced by the soft rhythm of paws on hardwood and the gentle breathing of a companion who never strayed far from his side. Sadie had grown quickly. Her frame filled out strong and lean. Her eyes grew more focused, and her presence, always so calm, so aware, remained uncanny. Daniel had dogs before, years ago when Maggie was alive, but Sadie was different. She didn't just follow commands. She anticipated them. Sometimes it felt like she understood his thoughts before he spoke. If this story hooked you already, just wait. Sadie's secret is only beginning to unfold. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. You won't believe where this leads. Daniel had begun bringing her with him on patrols. At first, it was just to keep her from being alone too long. But something changed after a call about a missing hiker in the forest west of Lake McDonald. The search team was spread thin, the snow was picking up, and daylight was vanishing fast. Sadie, restless at the cabin, barked once, low and sharp, then ran to the front door. It wasn't excitement. It was insistence. Daniel hesitated, then followed his gut and brought her with him into the woods. What happened out there was something no one on the force could explain. The search had gone cold, radios were cutting out, and visibility was near zero. But Sadie led Daniel through the trees with unshakable focus, stopping only once to listen, ears twitching, before veering off the designated trail. 20 minutes later, they found the missing hiker unconscious in a snowdrift, pulse weak, but alive. The medics called it luck. Daniel didn't argue, But inside, he felt it again. That familiar chill. Sadie hadn't stumbled onto the woman. She had known where to go. Word started spreading through the department. "You got yourself a miracle dog," someone joked, but others weren't laughing. There was talk, harmless at first, about how she acted, how she watched people. One deputy, younger and more superstitious, whispered, "She gives me the creeps, like she's half wolf or something." Daniel dismissed it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient lived behind Sadie's calm eyes. Something that hadn't come from training or genetics. At night, Daniel found himself waking in cold sweats, haunted by dreams of snowy forests and golden eyes watching him from the trees. In every dream, Sadie was there, but not as a pup. She stood tall, proud, her fur darker, her stance more wild. Sometimes, he heard voices in the wind calling her name, not in fear but in reverence. And that's when he remembered the wolves, and how they had never growled. It was late October when the strange occurrences began. Daniel had driven up to an old logging trail, responding to reports of broken fences and livestock missing from a nearby farm. The calls were vague. Something about shadows moving at night, strange howls too deep for coyotes. Daniel brought Sadie along as always. The wind carried a bite, and the bare trees swayed like bones in the fading light. As they walked the edge of the forest, Sadie froze. Her ears shot up. Then her gaze locked into the trees. Not random, not curious. It was fixed, intentional. Daniel followed her eyes, but saw nothing. The trees stood silent. Still, Sadie growled low in her throat, a sound Daniel had never heard from her before. Not fear, warning. He knelt beside her, resting a hand gently on her back. Her fur was stiff, her body tense like a coiled spring. Something was out there, just beyond his vision, but she could feel it. "You seeing something I'm not?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. She didn't flinch. Her gaze never wavered. That night, Daniel reviewed footage from his dashcam and trail camera he'd set near the property line. Most of it was static, trees waving in the wind, until the final clip. For 3 seconds, barely visible, a tall, four-legged silhouette passed through the frame, larger than any wolf native to Montana. It moved gracefully, deliberately, and its eyes caught the light like fire. Daniel paused the video. His throat tightened. The shape was familiar. Too familiar. It moved like Sadie, but it wasn't her. Later that week, Daniel drove Sadie to Dr. Emily Carter for a routine checkup. She was healthy, strong, alert, but Emily hesitated as she examined her. "Her behavior's evolving fast," she said cautiously. "Too fast. Some of her responses. They're more advanced than I've ever seen in a dog. Have you noticed anything strange?" Daniel didn't know what to say. He wanted to tell her everything. The trail, the video, the growl in the woods, but the words felt too strange, too unreal. Instead, he nodded vaguely and changed the subject. Back home, Daniel sat on his porch with Sadie at his feet, the mountains etched dark against the crimson sky. He sipped his coffee slowly, watching the treeline. Sadie lay still, eyes wide open, ears twitching. Then, just as the last light disappeared, she stood, muscles tight, head high. She let out a single bark, not loud, but sharp, then stared at the darkness. And Daniel realized she wasn't warning him this time. She was answering a call. The first snowfall of November came early that year. Daniel stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the forest blur behind thick flakes. Sadie was outside, unmoving, her gaze fixed on the woods. He tried to bring her in twice already, but she refused. Something in the air had her attention. He'd never seen her like this, still as stone, focused. It was as if the forest was speaking, and she was the only one who could hear it. Daniel's fingers tightened around his mug. That old ache in his chest, the one he thought had faded after Maggie's death, was back. Not from grief, from uncertainty. That night, Daniel finally gave in to his curiosity. He went into the garage and pulled out an old cardboard box labeled Maggie Personal. He hadn't touched it in 8 years. Dust coated the flaps. Inside were photographs, a few letters, and something he didn't remember keeping: Maggie's leather-bound journal. He flipped through it slowly. Most entries were about her garden, work, daily life, until he found a page that stopped him cold. There's something in the woods. I've seen it twice now. It watches but never approaches. I don't think it's an animal, not in the usual sense. Sometimes I dream about it calling me by name. Daniel's hands trembled. He stared at the handwriting. Maggie had never spoken of this. Not once. The entry was dated just 3 weeks before the accident that took her life. Daniel sat in silence, Sadie now lying beside him, her head resting on his foot. He reached down and gently ran his hand along her back. "What were you before I found you?" he whispered. "What are you now?" She didn't stir. Her breathing remained steady, but her eyes were open, watching the shadows dance across the floor. Daniel had always believed in logic, in routine. But now, too many pieces were falling into place. Maggie had sensed something. The wolves had given him Sadie, and Sadie was changing. 2 nights later, Daniel was woken by a noise. Not a bark, not a growl, a howl, low and drawn out, rising from deep in the forest. But it wasn't distant. It was close, right at the edge of the property. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the snow. Sadie stood by the tree line, unmoving, staring straight ahead. Then he saw them, 2 golden eyes reflecting back from the darkness, watching, the same eyes from the trail cam. And Sadie was no longer standing guard. She was waiting. Daniel stood in the doorway, boots buried in fresh snow, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. The beam cut through the darkness just enough to reveal what he feared and expected. A figure, large, 4-legged. Still, its eyes glowed amber in the light, unblinking, as if it had been waiting for him. Sadie stood between them, tail low, posture neither defensive nor submissive. Calm, familiar. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. Every instinct told him to yell, to raise the flashlight, to fire a warning shot. But he didn't, because in that eerie silence, something passed between Sadie and the creature. A recognition. Then, without warning, the figure turned and disappeared into the woods. No sound, no rush, just vanished. Sadie looked up at Daniel. Not pleading, not frightened, almost expectant. He swallowed hard, the cold air burning his lungs. "Come inside," he whispered. Sadie obeyed, but with one final glance back toward the trees. Daniel closed the door behind them, bolted it, and leaned against the frame. His mind was spinning. He'd seen wolves before. This wasn't that. It was something more, something older. The next morning, he found tracks in the snow, Sadie's, his own, and the third set. Much larger, deeper. They didn't follow a trail. They circled the house. Deliberately, and just as deliberately, they stopped, no sign of departure. As if the creature had simply vanished. Daniel knelt beside the tracks, fingers brushing the frozen indentations. He could no longer deny it. There was a connection between Sadie and whatever was out there. And it wasn't just survival. It was blood. Later that day, he drove back to Dr. Emily Carter's clinic. He needed answers, any answers. When he explained what he'd seen, Emily didn't laugh. She didn't scoff. She went quiet. Then she retrieved a manila folder from her drawer. "You're not the first to ask me about Sadie," she said softly. 3 weeks after you found her, a man came in asking about a litter of pups abandoned in the hills. Said he heard howling for days but could never find where it came from. He described a female that looked like a German shepherd, larger, with unnatural eyes. Said she moved like wind through trees. He was terrified. Daniel felt the room tilt slightly. And Emily hesitated. He left town, never came back. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The forest outside seemed to hum with energy. Sadie sat at the window again, but now, she didn't just watch. She whined softly, almost mournfully, as if something in the darkness was calling her home. And Daniel began to fear that home wasn't with him. For the next 2 days, Sadie grew restless. She paced the cabin in circles, whined at the windows, and scratched at the back door each time the sun dipped behind the mountains. She ate less, slept in short bursts, and always kept her ears tuned toward the woods. Daniel tried to soothe her. Long walks, gentle words, the old blanket by the fireplace, but nothing worked. Her body was still with him, but her spirit was somewhere else. The connection that once bound them now felt strained, like a thread pulled too tight. And Daniel, though he wouldn't admit it out loud, was afraid that he was losing her. On the third night, the howling returned, closer this time. Low, long, layered. Not just one voice, but many. Daniel stepped onto the porch with his rifle slung across his back, more for comfort than defense. Sadie followed, alert but not tense. As the sound echoed through the trees, she lifted her head and howled back. It was the first time he'd heard her do it. The sound didn't resemble a dog. It was deeper, more haunting, more ancestral. Daniel's chest tightened. Something inside her had awakened, and he wasn't sure it could be put back to sleep. That morning, she was gone. Do you think Sadie truly belonged to Daniel? Or was she always meant to return to the wild? Let me know what you believe happened out there in those woods. I'm reading every comment. The back door stood ajar. No signs of struggle or damage, just open. Her tracks led toward the woods, deliberate and confident. Daniel didn't hesitate. He followed them. His boots crushed the frostbitten ground as he moved deeper into the forest than he had in years. Sadie's trail was easy to follow at first, but then it stopped. No turn, no disturbance. The tracks simply ended, like she had stepped out of this world and into another. Daniel stood there, breathing hard, surrounded by trees so tall they swallowed the light. "Sadie," he called out. His voice echoed, thin and helpless. Nothing answered, not even the birds. Hours passed. He searched, called, circled back. Nothing. Eventually, with the light fading, Daniel returned to the cabin. He felt hollow. He'd lost partners before. He'd buried Maggie. But this was different. Sadie had chosen to go. That was the part that stung. She had heard the call and answered it. And for the first time since the day he found her in the snow, Daniel felt truly alone again. That night, he sat in the dark, staring at the empty spot by the fire. Her blanket remained untouched. The silence returned, heavier than ever. But just as he drifted into sleep, a soft thud hit the porch. Then another. He stood slowly, heart pounding, and opened the door. There, in the snow, were fresh tracks. But they weren't from Sadie. Daniel knelt in the doorway, eyes fixed on the fresh tracks stamped into the snow. They were large, far too large to be Sadie's, and spaced wide, as if whatever had left them walked with the weight and purpose of something not entirely wild, but not fully human either. The prints led from the tree line to his porch, and then back again. There were no side steps, no hesitation. Whoever or whatever had come had done so with intent. Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine, and not from the cold. Something had been there, watching, close enough to touch the door. He stepped out carefully, rifle in hand, flashlight sweeping the darkness. The woods were still, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy, almost expectant. The tracks remained perfectly intact, undisturbed, as if time had frozen just for them. Daniel followed them 10, maybe 12 yards into the forest before stopping. They ended abruptly, just like Sadie's had. His breath quickened. There were no signs of retreat, no broken branches or drag marks. It was as if the visitor had stepped into the earth itself. Back inside, Daniel sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames. His mind replayed the journal entry from Maggie, her mention of being watched, of something calling to her from the woods. He had ignored it for years, written it off as stress or imagination. But now the pieces were lining up. Maggie had seen them, Sadie came from them, and now they were coming to him. The idea would have sounded insane even a month ago, but now, it was the only explanation that made sense. The next morning, Daniel returned to the edge of the woods, hoping for another sign. Instead, he found something far more personal. Hanging from a low branch was Sadie's collar. Clean, intact and impossibly dry despite the snow. It hadn't been torn off. It had been placed. Daniel's chest tightened as he reached for it, fingers shaking. The collar was warm, still warm. She had been here. Recently. He looked around, heart pounding. "Sadie," he called out again. Only the wind replied. As night fell, Daniel couldn't sit still. The fear that once held him back was gone, replaced by something stronger. Resolve. If Sadie was out there, if she was still alive, still part of this world, he would find her. He packed supplies, a lantern, and Maggie's journal. Then he opened the same door she had walked through. And this time he stepped into the woods. The forest had never felt this alive. Every step Daniel took was swallowed by the snow, yet the silence wasn't empty. Pulsed. Shadows shifted unnaturally between trees. Distant cracks echoed in the cold air, branches breaking, or perhaps footsteps too deliberate to be random. His flashlight flickered despite new batteries, and he could feel the weight of eyes on his back. But he didn't stop. Sadie had led him this far. Now it was his turn to follow through, no matter where it ended. He passed the old streambed where he once found a lost boy 6 winters ago. The same place Sadie had dragged him toward during their first rescue together. At the time, it had felt like instinct. Looking back now, he saw it differently. It had been memory, familiarity, like she already knew the terrain, not from exploring but from living it. As the trail narrowed and the trees grew thicker, a soft light appeared ahead. Golden, flickering, not fire, something more ethereal, like moonlight bent through water. Daniel slowed his steps. He emerged into a clearing surrounded by tall pines that arched overhead like cathedral walls. In the center stood a circle of stones dusted with snow, ancient and deliberate in their placement. At the heart of the circle, Sadie. She stood tall and poised, her coat darker now, her posture regal. She didn't run to him. She didn't bark. She simply watched. Around her, the same wolves from that night years ago sat silently. Ridge, ash, and willow, each still, their eyes reflecting the strange golden glow from above. Daniel took a step forward, but something held him in place. Not fear, but reverence. Sadie slowly approached him, each step careful, controlled. When she reached him, she pressed her forehead gently to his knee. It wasn't a gesture of submission. It was goodbye. "You found where you came from," Daniel whispered, his throat tight. "Did I ever really have you? Or were you just passing through my life?" She looked up at him, and in that gaze, he saw everything: gratitude, connection, and something deeper, understanding. Then Ridge rose. The wolves turned and began walking into the trees, the golden light following their path like a ribbon in the dark. Sadie hesitated only a moment before following. She didn't look back. Daniel stood alone in the clearing, hands numb, breath catching in the cold air. He knew chasing her would mean forcing her away from what she was meant to be. So instead, he stayed. And for the first time in years, he felt at peace. The cabin felt different now. Quieter, yes, but not empty. There was a weight in the air, like a presence that hadn't fully left. Daniel kept Sadie's collar on the mantel above the fireplace. He hadn't lit a fire since the night in the clearing. He couldn't. The warmth would only remind him of what was gone. Days passed, then weeks. Winter deepened, but Daniel stopped checking the weather. He still walked the same trails each morning, hoping to see a paw print, a shadow between trees, anything that meant she was near. But the woods stayed still, as if honoring a boundary he wasn't meant to cross again. People in town asked where the dog had gone. He always gave the same answer: "She went home." Most nodded, confused but polite. Only Dr. Emily Carter seemed to understand. One morning, she left a note on his doorstep with no signature. It read, "Sometimes what we think is lost was never truly ours to keep. Thank you for giving her the time she needed." He read it over and over again, unsure if the words were meant for Sadie or for him. One afternoon, while organizing the attic, Daniel came across an old photo album. Inside was a picture he didn't remember ever taking. Maggie stood smiling in the backyard, arms wrapped around a German shepherd that looked strikingly like Sadie. Only this one had a white patch over her right eye. Sadie didn't. He flipped the photo over. Written in Maggie's handwriting, "Me and Larka, summer of '95. She always knew when something was about to happen." Daniel sat down hard. He remembered Maggie mentioning a dog once, briefly, but he never imagined, could it be a bloodline? A cycle? A return? That night, the howling returned. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was close, right outside the cabin. Daniel stepped out slowly, heart pounding. Snow blanketed everything in silence. No movement, no wolves, no Sadie. Only a single paw print in the snow, larger than a domestic dog's, yet unmistakably familiar. He knelt beside it, hand hovering just above the mark. Warmth radiated from it, as if the snow hadn't fully claimed it yet. He looked to the trees, his breath catching. The wind shifted, carrying a scent he hadn't smelled in weeks. Pine, musk, and something wild, something ancient. For the first time since Sadie left, Daniel didn't feel alone. But deep in the forest, something else had awakened. And it was coming. Spring came early that year. Snow melted faster than usual, revealing patches of green beneath the fading white. The forest, once still and cold, began to breathe again. Birds returned. Streams thawed, but Daniel remained the same. Watchful, quiet, always waiting for something he couldn't name. It had been 3 months since that final night in the clearing. Since Sadie had walked away, he had stopped expecting to see her. But not a day passed without her in his thoughts. She was a shadow in every tree line, a memory in every breeze. Not gone, just changed. One morning, just as the sun broke through the mist, Daniel heard movement outside. Not the rustle of branches. Footsteps. He stepped onto the porch, heart calm but alert. At the edge of the woods stood a young girl, no older than 10, barefoot, in a faded flannel shirt too big for her. Her hair was tangled, her face pale. She said nothing, just stood there, staring at him with wide, unreadable eyes. Behind her, half hidden in the trees, a large wolf sat still, calm, silent. And beside it, Sadie, older now, wiser, her coat darker, her posture proud. She didn't run to him. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything. Daniel knelt slowly, tears welling despite himself. The girl walked forward and placed something in his hand. A smooth stone, etched with markings he didn't recognize. Then, without a word, she turned and walked back into the woods. Sadie followed, glancing back only once. Daniel stood there for a long time, the stone warm in his hand. He didn't chase after them. He understood now. Sadie hadn't just returned to where she belonged. She had become part of something bigger, older, a guardian, maybe, a guide. And the girl, a soul led out of danger, just like so many before. Over the following weeks, Daniel felt peace returning to his life. He began to rebuild the old shed behind the cabin, turning it into a place of rest for hikers and lost travelers. He left food by the tree line. Sometimes it disappeared. Other times it remained untouched. But he always felt watched, protected, like someone or something was still keeping him in sight. Years later, people in Flathead County would still talk about a dog in the woods. A large shepherd with eyes too human and a presence too calm. Some said she was a ghost. Others believed she was a spirit. But Daniel never corrected them, because he knew the truth. Sadie wasn't gone. She had simply found where she was always meant to be. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe for more emotional and unforgettable stories. Some bonds go beyond understanding, and here we honor every one of them. Don't miss what comes next.